Travis McElroy's The Adventure Zone Graduation is full of love. It's clear by the way he talks that he loves his characters, his world, and his story. And that's the problem, isn't it? Because the reason TAZ Graduation was not the story that you'd hope for is because of one thing: control. Hello, welcome to Overthoughts, a grounded look at germane work. It's an analysis show where I talk about a piece of media or culture with a little bit more dignity than my other analysis show, Butt Cut. A lot of times throughout this, I'll be talking about my own experiences because, well, that's what I've got. And I'm hoping that by showing my own mistakes and what I learned from them, that other people won't make the same mistakes I have. And how these mistakes relate to TAZ Graduation. I'll be talking about my own thoughts and my own mistakes because I am not Travis McElroy and I cannot think for him, and neither should you. I'm gonna start by talking about criticism. Criticism isn't a mean opinion, or at least good criticism isn't. Criticism is best used when it's trying to take apart a piece of media in order to build it back together better. Unhelpful criticism is when all you do is tear something apart, and well, you can dislike something. You can't call it constructive criticism without offering context as to why you don't like it. So, when I say I'm criticizing TAZ Graduation, I'm trying to show how it can improve, or, well, since it's ending very soon, how it could have been better. So that others who find themselves in similar situations may know what to do. And for people who are trying to find the words to describe why they feel a certain way about TAZ Graduation. So, in order to talk about this properly, I'm going to have to give you some insight into my D&D podcast. I will not refer to it by name because I don't want this to end up being an advertisement for it. And also, as you will learn, it's got some issues. 4 years ago or so, I decided to bite the bullet and try to make a D&D podcast with my friends. Inspired by, of course, The Adventure Zone! And also HarmonQuest. The first time I tried, I failed horribly. But I had a vision! I wasn't going to be undeterred! I got a second group of players and tried again, and that's the one that's online right now. I thought that all that I had to do was just try harder, and it would become better. That I, as the DM, had a responsibility to make the game as narratively interesting as possible. And halfway through the campaign, I realized something. It was after playing in someone else's tabletop RPG that I was having a lot more fun in, that I just had like a little piece of control over. That collaborative storytelling is in fact good. And it was at that point that I looked at my own damn D&D podcast and asked my players how they felt. And we all agreed that we would just jump to the end and wrap the game up. We decided that this game that I put so much love into was just not fun. Like, sure, there were elements of fun in it, good scenes, some fun characters, but overall, the players wanted it to be finished, because no one was having any fun. I still tried my best, and we finished recording the finale, but I railroaded the players at the beginning of the campaign, and it was a story of my own creation, and the longer they wrote on it, the harder it was for them to get off before it was too late and the finale was already on the horizon. It was never the player's story. It was just mine. What I essentially did was a puzzle game, where there's only one way to progress, and that doesn't make for a compelling story. In that kind of story, you're a hero because the story needs a protagonist, and because of arbitrary magic, or like the gods played with fate and made you a hero. Not because you are a hero. Let's zoom out a bit. What makes a good story? Well, you got a beginning, you got a middle, and you got an end. And you got some vague plot character stuff sprinkled in there, and if you're not like a Megamind genius or Stephen King, you've only got some sort of idea of the story, and you just plop your characters in your mind world, and they do stuff, and story happen. And a good story will allow you to get invested into the characters' lives and see how their actions affect the world. A boring story will have the story happening around the characters. That's why people actually don't like Chosen One stories. Because the special protagonist isn't the hero because of their choices, but because the story, just needed somebody to move the plot along. You're the hero now, there you go. This can be avoided by discussing what sort of story the players want to participate in. What sort of philosophical themes they want the antagonist to represent. This will allow players to build their characters and intended arcs to grow in parallel with the campaign. You're likely going to have a bunch of different narrative threads going on here, but I know that having a meta discussion about your D&D game with your players about how the story is going to get your players more engaged and make the story more interesting. And so, let's talk about graduation, shall we? Now, I know the title of this video says why TAZ Graduation isn't TAZ Balance, and you'd be expecting some comparisons between the two. But what I mean by that title is the reception of these two D&D podcast campaigns are different. TAZ Balance had its faults for sure, but Griffin listened to criticism and improved, allowing his players to figure stuff out along the way, for the most part. Plus, I don't think it would have been half as popular as it would have been if not for the literal beacon of charisma, Taco Gay Elf Wizard, Adventure Zone Man. Let's be real. So, I'm not going to compare Balance and Graduation because it's a really apples and oranges situation. There aren't exact situations that were handled differently. The whole campaign was handled differently. Like I said, I made many of the same mistakes Travis has made. So, I can say with experience how it could have been better. For example, throughout listening TAZ Graduation, I noticed that there are many storytelling similarities. One of the first things Travis did was introduce a bunch of NPCs. And one of the first things I did was introduce a bunch of NPCs. Heck, I had an entire 1-hour episode that was only NPC exposition. It was terrible in retrospect. But in the moment, all I wanted to do was show everyone these cool characters I made. And based on how Travis first talked about the setting of TAZ Graduation, he probably had similar thought processes to mine. That Travis had all these characters and world building inside his head that he wanted to show off. But it ended up dominating the story. And okay, the world he has is pretty interesting. It's like if Venture Brothers was more sky high. I've been watching a lot of Jack Saint videos lately, where heroics and villainy are just commodities in an ever-escapable prison that is capitalism. There's a whole system in place where characters and geography and lore, and I honestly found that really fascinating, and is really what kept me going and listening in some points. But how often do the players really interact with this world? How many times did Fitzroy Maplecourt, Knight in Absentia of the Realm of Good Castle, really make any decisions that affected things as a whole? Or did the Master Fierbolg ever make a definitive decision? Not a whole lot. Sure, there were moments where they interacted with the world and stuff, but it always felt like Travis was deciding the goals. There was a moment early on in the series that really hinted me to this. The Master Fierbolg finds a wounded Pegasus. And then there's a 6-month time skip, and then the Pegasus can now fly, and the whole team unlocks fast travel. 6 months. a lot can change in 6 months. And like that, it's skipped over. Like, I get it, they're at school, and you gotta end the semester. But we missed out on character development that's going to feel odd and awkward now after all that time is skipped. And it's almost as if Travis put that wounded Pegasus there, just so Master Fearbold could have a cool animal friend and could also bring them around the world faster, which, I mean, it's not a bad thing, it's just... what did they do to deserve this reward? Narratively speaking. Sure, you could get, like, your cool car-obsessed player character, an old beat-up car, and then, oh wow, time skip, look, it's all fixed and you can now use it! How does that push the narrative along? There's nothing developed. There's a thing I heard on Philosophilse This by Stephen West, where the worst thing to wish upon someone is for all their desires to be met, instantly. There has to be some sort of struggle in order for the reward to be satisfying. Sidebar, if you try to use that to justify capitalism, I will piss on your grave. So what does this mean for a D&D game? That in this instance, Travis set aside the long-term, potentially narratively interesting reward, or short-term one. And this is probably just an experience thing, honestly. But this is just one of many examples. There's probably way more experienced DMs out there who can give better tips on these sort of things that Travis can improve on. Be sure to share those in the comments, I'd love to hear those. But the main overarching theme that the mistakes that Travis keeps making boils down to one thing: control. Specifically, controlling the narrative to the DM's vision. Now, I do want to make clear, there have been people who have been giving advice and tips to Travis on DMing, but Travis hasn't learned the main root cause of all these issues. Losing the forest for the trees, the big issue with the tiny ones. This was made clear by one of the latest episodes where I had to physically skip over parts of it because it reminded me so much of the same mistakes that I had made. Of the entirety of episode 35, ironically called multiple choice, there was only one decision that the players truly made. What hat to wear to the fairy drug rave. Everything else was decided for them, or they were given so few choices that there was no others available to them. Let's actually break down episode 35 a bit. Spoilers ahead, obviously. We start out with some exposition with the antagonists talking to each other, giving us some insight into their motivations. Then we go back to a scene in front of the school with the heroes wondering what they're gonna do to break through the villain's devil demon army, and them talking to some help that has magically arrived out of nowhere. You see, earlier on, Fitzroy had set up that the school that he originally attended was a scam, though it's not ever explicitly stated, it's been heavily implied. But now that very same school supposedly does exist, knows about these issues, wants to help, and has come to help. All apparently figured out off-screen. You can tell by Fitzroy's and Griffin's reactions that this was unplanned. Maybe Fitzroy, after working so long and hard, deserved this reward, but because it was set up all this time to be a scam, to show how naive and eager Fitzroy was to be a hero, this reward doesn't make any sense. It invalidates all of that prior characterization. Then some of the NPCs and the players get caught up on how the armies are positioned. Then one of the NPCs says that these 3 students that haven't really had much army leadership practice or any really choice in any of that matter, that they are the leaders here and the NPCs are waiting for their plan. Once again, DM taking away the initiative and the choice away from the players and making them heroes because they were chosen to do this. With like a less mystical, kind of like chosen one moment. Then, one of the NPCs drops a hint as to how they might break through this barrier. Fitzroy picks up on this, and then an NPC offers a solution as to how to accomplish this. Then, another NPC tells the players to take a rest while the NPCs work on breaking through the barrier. Okay, sure, it's fine. NPCs can make decisions and the like, and it makes the world feel more alive. But because these NPCs are set up to be more competent than the players are pushed off to the side since they aren't the driving force of the plot. While the players talk about resting, they mention that they would actually just want to try to run away from the whole plot. They humor this a little bit, but they do end up actually just sleeping anyways. Then, Travis narrates some of the dreams that the players are having, setting up some villain foreshadowing and tying up some loose ends. And then the big bad confronts them in a dream world, trying to figure out what the players' plan is, laying out some of their motivations, talking to the players about what's likely going to happen, and Fitzroy gets some insight into the big bad's motivation again. And then they wake up with a fun little fairy dude Festo! And then they get to choose a hat! And then they literally get pressured into taking drugs to go to a rave in the middle of a forest to reconnect with their magic. Fixing another of Fitzroy's plot lines, but not because he did anything, but because Travis set it up like that. Like, yay, congrats, Fitz! Your magic is fixed because the DM put all the pieces in place and made the decision that you ended up taking because it was the only one you could take. And that's episode 35. Oh boy, do you see what I mean? Taking initiative away from the players, limiting their choices, giving them the illusion of choice, and making a plot without the players' input. You know how my players reacted when I did that shit to them? They put on a happy face, played along, and suffered in silence until I asked them after everything was done, and they said, and I quote, "So it's not that you have no say in your story. It is, after all, your world. But should it be a game where it's based more on a linear storyline, it should still be the players deciding how things get accomplished with room for creativity. I think a major problem with the game was that it felt like an encounter, puzzles, we had only one solution. And they were either constructed to take away our solving tools or answers that were technically correct but still wrong. I don't know how the other players feel, but in my experience, I felt like the players were just there to move the plot from predetermined point A to predetermined point B. I can't speak for the McElroys, but given the mistakes Travis has made are reflective of ones that I have made, it wouldn't surprise me if they felt something like this. And I know a lot of listeners have also felt this, that Travis's DMing style is too focused on making his story. I know how hard it is to get yourself off that railroady roller coaster, but the sooner you do, the better. Because if there's anything I have learned through my failure to effectively DM a D&D podcast, it's that D&D is best when it's the player's story, not yours. Sure, it's your world and you love your characters. Do you think I made Strawberry Sunshine with hate in my heart? No. But it's up to the players to make the decision to interact with your world. To write their story through their actions. To make the plot theirs because they decided to. Not because you gave them no other choice. Trust your players. Everyone has a story they want to tell. And it's up to the DM to be the one to stitch it all together, but it's the players that choose the substance of the story because that's what it's all about. Cooperation, collaboration, bringing people together. A story made together is more fun, which ends up making it better. But with all that said, it's not all Travis's fault. It's extremely unhealthy to pile all that responsibility onto yourself for any reason. It helps no one, and certainly not yourself. A lot of the mistakes made in graduation are just from inexperience. It's his first time DMing a long D&D campaign, and any DM will tell you their first time DMing was a huge learning experience because, well, you know, they knew nothing before they started. He's also got a lot of expectations to live up to. After TAZ Balance, the comic book, hit the New York Times bestseller list, I can't imagine the pressure of trying to live up to that, especially for your first big campaign. And how that's gonna affect how you run your game. Like, if that were me, I'd probably obsess over every little bit of my campaign to try to make it perfect. Well, kinda actually did happen, and, well, at least in my experience, made the campaign a lot worse. I put all of that responsibility on myself to make the campaign good. And like I said before, that's not what makes D&D good. And for a D&D podcast, let's be fair here, you do kind of have to make something a little bit more structured than your typical campaign, which causes the DM to plan a lot more of the plot without the player's input. So it's not a bad thing to make an overarching plot. It's not a mistake to have things in the campaign build up to a big bad at the end. That's how tabletop actual play, entertainment, audio stuff works. So, I will be lenient on Travis for his inexperience and the pressures that are put on him. The fact that people have been actually giving him criticism and tips as episodes have been coming out, but him not learning from these big things means that this lackluster story is mostly on Travis. And that sucks. Because I think that Travis has a lot of potential here. It's clear he's creative enough, and that he just needs to learn from his mistakes. I'm excited to see what sort of stuff Travis will put out next. Heck, if he realizes he loves his characters and stories and writing and worlds so much, then he needs to write a book. Oh, write a book like it's so easy. Yeah, I know, I'm writing a book right now. But seriously, if you have a vision for a story and you don't want other people taking charge in it, you need to write a book. So, TAZ Graduation isn't TAZ Balance, because it was DM'd by Travis McElroy, an ambitious, inexperienced DM, who likely wanted his story to succeed so badly that he put the responsibility solely on himself, and then failed. So here's a couple of tips that I've put together for you guys, so you can learn how to DM and try to avoid kind of some of these mistakes. Talk to your players before and after game about how they like how the story is going. And if they say, you're the GM, you tell me, tell them that it's their story as well and it's at its best with everyone's input. Consider having a session 0, where you introduce players one by one and ease them into the story and set up the mood and the backstory for everybody. Be self-critical and evaluate the story as it's being made. Now, you can't be too critical, but as long as you keep creating the story, you're gonna keep improving as you go. You gotta figure out what worked and what didn't, and what you could have done better. And I'm sure you're gonna be able to do something better next time. Don't worry if your players don't interact with all the cool little things that you put in the world. Just put it somewhere else in the campaign. I know you got a lot of characters and stuff in that big brain of yours, but let your players organically interact with the world. The story will grow better. Make the players' consequences serious. If they make a mistake, make it hurt. Don't be scared to really remind them of their consequences of their actions, because it makes the world feel more real. A lot of times you may encounter a player that wants to take a bit too much control over the narrative over the others. You, as the DM, have to be the referee, deciding what the rules are, not the players. Tabletop RPGs are best as a collaborative storytelling game. So let the players have their input, but don't hand over the reins. Use dice rolls sparingly. Having everyone roll perception every time you need someone to see something just slows stuff down. Use dice rolls when you want there to be a chance of something happening. And when that does happen, have some one person designated, the most skillful at that role, to roll for the whole team. There's plenty of ways to spice things up in the campaign instead of killing a PC. I think it's a common misconception that the best way to add drama to your campaign is to make death around every corner at every moment. What ends up happening is the players don't really connect with their characters and they just don't roleplay as well, so... there are some tabletop RPGs that use this as a sort of challenge, like Hackmaster. But for the most part, that's only fun for the people who actually just want that challenge. Again, talk to your players and figure out what they want in their game. Take notes! Take notes, take notes, take notes, take notes, take notes, take notes, take notes. Just take a bunch of notes. Take notes of like names, places, locations, everything. It keeps things consistent and makes the world feel way more alive. Everyone starts somewhere. And the best way to learn how to be a good DM is by practice. You're not going to be good at first. I would recommend doing a lot of smaller campaigns, lots of little pre-written one-shots and one-shots that you've written yourself. Slowly building up your storytelling prowess with practice. And these are just a couple of tips that my friends and I have put together. I'd also love to hear some more tips from you, so put any tips you have in the comments below. And well, I know, TAZ does mean a lot to people. To be fair, I don't hate TAZ Graduation. I just think that it's not as good as it could have been. But there are other actual play podcasts out there. Obviously, you got your Critical Roles and your Dimension 20s. Those are good, popular, because they're good. But I want to take this moment to highlight another D&D podcast on YouTube. Thrilling Intent by the channel The Third Wheel. It's basically all the things I wanted my podcast to be, but it's done way better. It's got visuals, it's got music, it's got animations, but it's only got 25,000 subs on YouTube. Go watch them. They deserve more views. When I started my D&D podcast, I just kinda did it. Jumping off the plane and building the parachute on the way down. I want to do a video on D&D podcasting in the future, but for now, this is what I wished I had known before starting. Don't try so hard. Obsessing over perfection will not make it perfect. Trust that the story that your players want to make will be better than the one inside your head. The most important thing is to have fun. Work towards that. And also, point the goddamn mic in the right direction. You've literally got it pointed 90 degrees the wrong way. Use a blanket to minimize the noise and not this weird foam cube thing that doesn't work! Anyways, all in all, TAZ Graduation was a fun little adventure that wasn't as fun as it could have been. It had cool ideas and a bunch of fun characters and an interesting world. But it didn't achieve as much due to the lack of engagement with the players. I wanted to see the Thunderman LLC unbridled and free. I wanted to see those 3 wacky dudes growing as characters and making mistakes and learning from them. Taking an active role in their story, instead of being pawns in someone else's. What we wanted was the McElroy's story of the Thunderman. And what we got was Travis's TAZ Graduation. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stuff like this, you've got to support me on Patreon. I want to be able to do more stuff like this in the future, more video essays, analyzing cool media stuff that I like, and doing this stuff right here. So you've got to support me on Patreon so I can, like, you know, live stuff and have rent. So support me at patreon.com/chibicheesepuff and take a look at all the rewards that you can have access to with the different tiers and all that. You get behind the scenes content, early access, and credits, you know, like you're seeing right here. I'd especially like to thank Maybe Not, Christopher, Radar Love, and Eva for their support. Thank you. Other ways to support me are, you know, just commenting below and subscribing to my YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitch and Twitter and Tumblr and you know, ring that notification bell and all that. Like, comment, and subscribe! Anyways, thanks again for watching. I really do appreciate all the support that you guys have given me so far. And I hope to make more of this stuff in the future! Yeah!